Hello, welcome pen friends. My name is Chris and I'm back with another ink profile. We're going to work our way right through Ink Flight 25. So the first one that we just did was this blue one, and now we're on to the light green one that's the second one on the panel. So these inks are from Japan, and the company is Kyoto TAG Kyo-no-oto and also Urahairo. And I don't have my cheat sheets right in front of me on how to say these, and to be honest, my practicing hasn't really helped me too much. But I did want to say before we start that if you're becoming a little bit discouraged with these inks because they aren't as saturated, these two are like that. But then we've got some really saturated inks coming up. We've got at least 4 that appear to be very saturated, and then this one in the middle is a question mark. But I'm absolutely sure that we're going to see quite a different story with the remaining inks. So let's dive right into this Urahairo and see what we've got. First and foremost, we'll put it to the bath test and see what happens there. Okay, and then okay, so I forgot to mention these inks are all part of it. What Ink Journal sends out for a monthly subscription that I subscribe to, and I will link that all in the description for you, where to go to get it if you're interested. So this is the last one, the one that was called this word here. Yesterday I knew how to say this, Haisuku. And it was very typical. It mostly washed off. If you really work at it, you can read what was there, but it's a very typical fountain pen ink. And I think we're going to find this one is too, but you never know. Sometimes they stay behind on the paper pretty good. So let's just put that aside and get right into my Rhodia Ink Journal, Rhodia Goal Book. And we'll flip backwards one page. So we've got the two, the beginnings, and pretty soon we'll have them all filled in. So, okay. So here we are on the right-hand side of this spread here. I'm going to try to make this gracious so you can see it. Okay, so we're talking about this ink here, and it did do really well, I thought, in the broad nib, but that's all I can say. I really didn't enjoy it in the fine nib at all, and we'll look at it on several papers, but just generally speaking, I just couldn't wait to finish. I didn't want to do that in the fine nib. And then we do have some chromatography, which I'll hold up. This one had a lot more yellow, so it had blue and yellow, of course, because it's a green. And yesterday's was a blue, and it had much more of the blue and very little yellow. So that was interesting, even though I'm using the coffee filters and so on. So I got to tell you, the availability of this one is discouraging. It was a limited edition, and it seems to be very hard to find. Someone may do better than I did. I found 4 samples on hand at Venice1938.com. They had, but at the time I was checking, and at the time you're watching this, that may be a different story. I just wasn't finding it in stock anywhere else. And it wasn't an all-day exhaustive search or anything. It was just half an hour on the computer trying to figure out, well, where could you get it if you wanted it? And I toyed around with not doing the profile, but I'd really like to do it anyway, because knowing what I know about limited edition things, people do buy them and they do resell them on eBay. They do, you know, the spotty availability sometimes, so we don't want to give up on it, you know, and somebody may really like this. So let's go right into the other notebooks. We've got 3 more. This one is the little CVS caliber notebook. It's a very inexpensive one. And I'm enjoying seeing the inks on this. It helps me decide which ones I can really use on this. So, you know, it looked nice with the ink swatch there. And it was okay in the broad nib. It wasn't the smooth experience that it is on the Rhodia or the Clairefontaine, though. I mean, this paper is fairly smooth, but when you run the nib over it, it isn't a smooth writing experience always. So, no bleed through. Then dropping down into the fine nib, it was, I didn't like it, you know, I didn't like it at all. It wasn't like nails on a chalkboard, but it was almost to that point. So, but keeping in mind that my opinions are kind of weird in the point being that I like really saturated and really bright inks. So it's saying a lot for me to like it in the broad nib even. But I do think it's very pretty and unusual. It was really unusual. So here in the Nemesine, we get a good close look at it. Just by taking the ink and painting it on, I get a nice idea of the range, you know, from light to dark. Just, you know, no particular, you know, attempt at drawing anything, just getting it on there. And then I use the Moonman Mini glass nib, which kind of lines up almost a medium nib, basically. And it looked good in here. You do need quite a bit of well, it puts down a lot of ink, let's put it that way. So when it's a lighter ink like this, it's good. It's good for how it ends up looking. And it did do okay. It's quite readable, I think, in this pen. And then, of course, it started to run out of the dip toward the end. But here's what it looked like there. Oh dear, this last one, I didn't, oh, it wasn't a very good experience when you switched out of the broad nib. But this is the Cafe Note by Nanami Paper Company. Tomoe River paper with a 7mm line grid. Line, no, not grid, line, with 7mm lines. Now, I was okay with it over here in the broad nib, even though it's faint compared to, I mean, if you look through mine, you know, I like really dark bright inks, you know. All you have to do is page through, and most of them are pretty bright. So it's like, I think something's in my eye or something when I see this. But it was still okay here. And then in the fine nib, that's not okay with me because I can't read it back very good. But yeah, I'm just being fussy now. That's ridiculous. But I'll let you draw your own conclusions because I know that many people like this lighter, understated inks like this. I just don't like them when you get them into a fine nib. So, okay, so that was that. Now let's run right through the paper samples. Starting with, whoops, Tomoe River paper, 52-gram white. And you could see kind of an odd thing going on here. You see that the top entry for this ink is in the broad nib, and it's kind of that, you know, pleasant looking green. And then when you get it into the fine nib, it actually, I don't know, it picks up on the darker part of the ink somehow. And I really don't know how to explain that. Oh, I've got some shadows that I don't like. I'll tilt it a little so that you don't get that. So, I don't know, I think you can see what I mean. It just sort of distorts things a little here and there. And we'll see that not just on the Tomoe River paper, but I wanted you to be aware of it. Okay? And then here is the Clairefontaine 90-gram French ruled paper. And it was nice smooth paper, and it, you know, it went on nice in the broad nib. And then it did that kind of that same number in the fine nib. It doesn't look the same, which I understand. I mean, that's the way it goes with these. With many inks, it's drastically different in the fine nib. But I just thought, oh, this just looks like a mistake, you know. And I know that pen is super clean because this ink here was absolutely easy to clean out, and it was, you know, it was running clean, and I did it just as many times, so there's no way that it's, you know, contamination or anything like that. So, okay, there's those two. Now, Rhodia. Here is Rhodia 80-gram dot grid white paper. Again, I thought it was decent in the broad nib on the top there. We're looking at this one. And then it just sort of does a changing. It's like a chameleon in that fine nib. So, and you know, if you happen to like that, the way it looks, then you're in luck, I guess. So here's the Hamlin Optic 90-gram paper. Now on here, with this particular paper, a very strange thing happened that didn't seem to happen with anything else. It was wet enough, and it was coming out of both nibs very nicely, but if you notice, it may be doing what it sometimes does when it shades, but it seems like it's not really skipping. Don't tell me that. It couldn't, because that nib doesn't do that. But in the attempt to shade or whatever, it just looks like it went white. I don't know, it's Friday, but maybe I'm just seeing things. But no, I don't think so. It did it in both nibs. And like I said, the flow was fine. I felt like it was definitely wet enough coming out of the nibs, but it's just, yeah, it leaves a little something to be desired there. For someone like me that likes the brighter stuff. Okay, and here's the Leuchtturm 1917 dot grid paper. I liked how it looked on the with the broad nib, and then it muddies it up, and maybe you can see it best in this example here on the Leuchtturm, the fine nib. It just sort of distorts that color to where it isn't any longer what I wanted it to be, and that's very personal, I know. So, all right, let's grab, this is the new paper that came in this ink flight as a pen goodie, or as a stationery goodie. And here it is in the broad nib, and it got a little bit of that happening like it did on the Hamlin paper, but this is real bumpy paper too, so I have to get used to writing on it, that's all. I think probably, whereas I barely touch the paper with most of these, you probably need to, you know, apply just a little more pressure on this. But anyway, there you can see for yourself what it does. It looks different in the fine nib. Okay, and then final paper sample is Office Depot College ruled paper. Broad nib and fine nib. And this paper, even though it's thirsty, didn't offer much of an advantage as far as showing this ink off. I felt like it was okay in the broad nib, but again, I didn't really like it in the fine nib. So, okay, there's the paper samples. Now, let's check in on it. It is pretty much, it seems like it's doing what the other one did. Let's see, let's pull that one over here. Yeah. So we'll see when it dries, you know, after I leave them pretty much the same amount of time. And let's grab the color comparison panel. This is going to kind of look like a checkerboard, I'm afraid, today, because I didn't have anything like it, but I pulled what I could pull that was anywhere near, you know, that was green and was green, basically. As it turns out, there were two that were somewhere near. That's why I say checkerboard, because we got this pattern going on. Our ink of the day, the Urahairo, is in the middle, and then, you know, these two seem to be the most similar. Over here on the right is Noodler's Polar Green, which is quite water resistant and didn't move around a lot, and then Birmingham Sport Donelli Grass Stain there up the top left. Interesting. But it doesn't surprise me that I didn't have anything like this, because it isn't very saturated. I am coming to really love green inks, though. Just that I would go for brighter ones. And, like, here is Monteverde Olivine at the bottom center. And I really feel like that's way dialed up in saturation and color. But I really like this one. So if you're looking for darker, you could easily find it just, you know, in an ink like this, or even something lighter. I don't have very many in that range, but yeah. So if you're like me and you just think this is too light for you, I'm sure there are other olive-colored or sort of. I think this stands for underside of a leaf, is what the word sort of roughly translates to. And then, you know, I've got some olive greens and some army green here on the right. Diamine Safari, which there's no way they match. It's just that they kind of made me think of it. So I pulled them out. Now, the last part I almost don't want to show you, but I guess I will. I didn't like how the visual journal came out at all. I mean, it was kind of like... Okay, here it is. You know, I had quite a bit of hope at first, but once it dries, it takes away most of the color. And I kind of had an attempt at a tree there. That was cool. And then up here, you see some of the yellow coming out, which was kind of fun. But just, you know, I'd much rather work with a more saturated color. And we're getting there. In fact, I think the next ink is going to satisfy that. It's going to be different. And then over here, this just looks like an error of some kind. I gave up in the end and just kind of splattered with the paintbrush and to see what would happen. And it just mostly got lost, except for maybe here. You could still see a little of the yellow and color coming out. So that's pretty much it. I don't want to be negative at all. This is a pretty shade of ink. It's a personal preference that I like more saturated inks, and I'm not the only one. But here is our panel again, and our next ink is Moonlight of Higashiyama, and this ink belongs to this second one where it says Kyoto TAG Kyo-no-oto. So it's just a little bit different designation, that's all. Same company and everything. Made, you know, ink from Japan. So, okay, well, let me know. I'm curious to know what you think of this. Again, now I didn't try a background with this one. It was so much lighter than the blue one, and that barely made a background that I didn't try it. I could have, you know, but I was running out of daylight here today, and I thought, well, I'll just skip that part. But let me know what you thought of this one. I am curious to know what people think of it. And hopefully I wasn't too negative about it. I don't mean to be, because it's, you know, it was quite pretty in that broad nib. I really, you know, I have to say, it, you know, there's nothing at all wrong with that in the broad nib. So, and many of us use broad nibs. Also, actually I have a double broad somewhere around here, and I have stub nibs that would definitely do for this ink. So, that's the video for today, but I will be back with that beautiful orange ink. So, bye for now.